Hey everybody, it's Angelia. Welcome back to Read and Reread. Today I want to talk about apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic fiction. This is a category that I have read a lot of books in that I really enjoy, and I want to talk about some books that are ones that kind of stick in my mind that I've spent time thinking about after I've read them. So even some of them, I even might have a little bit of a mixed review about certain aspects, but for some reason they stayed with me. So first of all, let's talk about how I describe this genre. And this is just my take on it. Somebody else might have something else. So if you disagree with how I define these categories, you can leave it in the comments. But, so, an apocalypse, of course, is some sort of event that either completely ends or somehow heavily impacts to an irreparable extent society as we know it. So it could be a natural event such as a pandemic, which I guess that could be human-made or natural depending on how it begins. But a pandemic, catastrophic climate change events, a meteor falling on the earth. Or it could be human-made, like a nuclear bomb, or some other kind of attack. Or it could be, an alien invasion, or some different things that could happen. Some are more plausible than others. But apocalyptic fiction would be books that take place describing that happening, what people are doing, what occurred. And then post-apocalyptic is people surviving in the aftermath and what they do. So some of these books kind of fall in that continuum. The events might be occurring or they may have already occurred. And there's usually a lot of exploration about how people respond, what they do, what it brings out in human nature. A lot of times it's not like, doesn't bring out the best things in human nature. But, so there's different levels. I mean, they're all kind of tense and anxious sort of stories, and sometimes they're more hopeful or uplifting in the end than others. But to me, that's kind of sums up those type of books. And then a close cousin of those would be dystopian fiction, where society is somehow being run a different way than it is actually today. And that could be in the future, or it could be an alternative reality. It could be in response to some of these other kinds of things that may have occurred, or just changes in societal thinking and government that has resulted in a different reality that is definitely troubled, and usually somebody challenges it or discovers the true nature of it, or there's an uprising or something like that. And I like those books as well. But that's not exactly what I'm talking about here. I'm going to focus on the apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic titles, just a few of them that I think you might want to read if you have not read already. If you have some great books in this category that you think I should take a look at, please leave that in the comments, because I really love reading this type of book. Okay, so here's what I'm going to talk about. To begin with, the first experience I probably had with reading a book of this nature was this trilogy, and I believe I talked about these maybe in my, I don't know if it was in my newbie video or maybe the unpopular opinions tag, but the White Mountains trilogy by John Christopher is a young adult trio of novels, and I came upon these books somewhere in the late part of elementary school, and I found them at the school library, and I read them on heavy repeat for a few years. I was obsessed. These are still some of my favorite books, and I recently reread them, and they were still good. They were written in the 60s, but they made a movie version, a TV British show in the 80s, and there's a whole weird fan base for that show. Like, they actually recreated things out in the countryside, and they were always very upset because there's 3 books in the story, and the series got canceled after 2 of them. So anyway, this is the basic idea here is that it's set in the future, an unspecified amount of time in the future, but the everybody is very agrarian, and it's like it was in the past. There's no technology. People live in farming villages, and they don't really have a lot of contact with people beyond kind of a walking or horse riding distance from where they are. So their overall knowledge of the world and history is pretty limited, and they are controlled to a large degree by these tripods. And you can kind of see a picture on the front of this kind of big thing here. And it's like a big giant structure on 3 legs with an orb at the top. And when you get to be about 13 or 14, they take you up inside and they put this cap on your head, and then you are kind of like mellowed out. You don't question things. You just kind of keep the peace, go with the flow. And so it's a very orderly society, but nobody really knows if the tripod itself is the creature or if there's something inside. They don't think a lot about it because first they're kids and then they're capped and they're just kind of, status quo. So it's about a boy named Will and his cousin who they find out that there's a secret society of rebels that live in the mountains that are not capped and are trying to overthrow the tripods. And he and his cousin run away to join this group. And then the second book is about when Will and another boy infiltrate the city where the aliens live. And then there's a conclusion book, and I can't tell too much about that. So it's the most science fiction-y of this group that I'm talking about today, probably because it's kids' books. But they are very fun, very imaginative, and I have had terrible success my whole life with convincing other people to read these. I try to share them in my job as a teacher and then as a librarian, and every now and then I found a taker. But apparently me and some people in the UK are the only ones that are like hardcore into this series. But I mention them because that was my beginning introduction into this genre. The second book I want to talk about is pretty famous right now. It's Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And I read this book when it was a new release, and that was my first introduction to that author. And in this book, there's a lot of different time periods going on. So at the beginning of the book, there are people attending a play, and an actor collapses on the stage. And afterward, someone who was there at the performance gets a call from a friend who is an ER doctor who says, you need to just get out of here because something's taken over. There's a pandemic on the loose. So we have some characters that get introduced. There's a girl who's a kid in the theater group at the time of that play. Then the guy who saw the play and his brother, and there's some other people. And then it goes forward 20 years into the future where that girl is a woman who's traveling with a theater group of musicians and actors. They're kind of like troubadours, and they're going across the countryside through the villages. And this is in the aftermath of a hideous pandemic that has wiped out the majority of the population of the whole world. So, of course, she wrote this a number of years ago before COVID. I don't know what kind of different takes she'd do on it now, although she did kind of touch on a different pandemic in her most recent book. So there are multiple time periods going here and characters and what they were doing in the past and in the present of the time when the traveling group is going. And they come upon a town that has a kind of a crazy cult dictator guy called the Prophet. And anyway, it's a really good story, but it's very intricate, like my tongue, intricately plotted for the characters and the time periods. And if you've gone on to read more of her books, you know that she does this. She weaves a web of the characters that connects. Her most recent book, Sea of Tranquility, really did this a lot because they also involve time travel. So I do have these two books that she wrote subsequently to Station 11 that are not sequels, but there are some recurring characters and themes throughout her work. And I do want to get a copy of Station 11 and reread it. I have not seen the TV version of it that is on HBO because I don't have HBO. I've heard it's good. I'm highly skeptical because I am the ultimate person who always says the book was better. But, I remain open-minded just a little bit. There's a crack in my mind for it to be good. All right, the next one I would like to discuss is Severance by Ling Ma. And I read this book a few years ago, right before, I'm going to say this book was about 2018-ish, 2019, pre-pandemic. It is a book about, and this is one thing that's interesting about this book, is that it takes place in the year 2011. So the author actually set the book a little bit in the past, but again, we have a pandemic. So in this book, we have a young woman who, I think her name was Candace, and she works for a publishing company, and it's not really the job of her dreams, but it's sort of a foot in the door, pay the rent kind of job. The main thing that this company does is publish cheap Bibles, and the cheaper the better, and they keep trying to find ways to make their edition even cheaper made than other editions, and they're mostly published in China, and she is Chinese American, and so this is what she does. She involved in the distribution or the really badly made Bibles, and a weird pandemic began, and this is in New York City. She also has a blog that she had done for a while and had kind of gone dormant, and she starts it again during the time of what's happening in the story called New York, I think it's called New York Ghost. Yeah, NY Ghost. And where she just goes around and chronicles the way the city looks, especially as this terrible disease progresses throughout the United States. And this disease, it starts out, the symptoms are a little vague at the beginning, but when it progresses, it's really hard to explain this, but it's a kind of a zombie type thing. The person is stuck doing a repetitive actions from their daily life until they die, and they're no longer communicating or eating or anything, but like somebody might be standing, like making a pot of coffee over and over into infinity until they just die of starvation. Or what she goes, one point she goes up to a hot dog stand to buy something, and she realizes the guy is one of those, and he's just standing there with rotten materials making imaginary hot dogs. So it's super creepy. And she is one of the people that for some reason doesn't catch this. And she ends up falling in with a group of survivors that has a kind of a pretty off-kilter leader of the group who says that he has a compound that he can take them all to in Chicago. So that's what's going on in the story, and it's really different. You're not sure where it's going. It's not the straight-up kind of, fight the zombies kind of narrative, but it just... I got stuck there for a second. But the reason why it's called Severance is because at the beginning, when they don't really know how bad it's going to be, but people are quitting and leaving the city, they offer her, if she will stay on and try to get these jobs done and not quit, this large bonus for her severance package on a certain date. She says, don't quit right now, stay till this date, and then you're going to get this giant bonus. And so that motivates her, but by the time it gets to that time, everything is so different that the meaning of all that has completely changed. So that is Severance. I don't want to say anything more about it and spoil it, but it's really unusual, and I really enjoyed it. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about it, but it's really a cool book. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is The Fireman by Joe Hill. Now, Joe Hill usually writes horror novels, but this one is a little bit different. So if you haven't read any Joe Hill because you don't really like horror, you might want to give this one a try if you do like apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic type stories. So because it's not a horror book. He wrote Nosferatu and Heart-Shaped Box and some other horror novels. He wrote the short story that the current movie, The Black Phone, is based on. So, and he is Stephen King's son, so he can write a good straight-up horror book. But The Fireman is a little bit different. In this story, there is a disease that starts to run through the population, and it appears this pattern that's almost looks like tattoos appears on a person's skin. And in some cases, it's actually kind of beautiful looking, but it's not a good sign when you start to see this pattern appear on your skin, because as it takes over, you can combust. Now, when I heard about this premise, I thought, is he actually ripping off his own dad? Because that kind of sounds like Firestarter. But it's not really the same thing at all. Although, I'm sure he has read that and been influenced. But it's more like your emotional state might set it off, and you don't really know when it's going to happen. And so there are people that are progressing through this and dying. And then in the story, a young woman who is pregnant finds out that she has it, and her partner wants nothing to do with it. And so she takes off because they want to confine. She works at a hospital, and that's kind of how she got it. But they want to confine the people and try to keep them away from everybody else so they don't spread it and so that they don't combust and set everything on fire. But she runs away and goes to seek other people, and she finds a community where they're trying to learn how to self-control it so that they can live with it and channel it, but not just blow up all the time. So she starts to learn that. And a ton of other things happen. It's a really long book, and it's like a quest traveling kind of book. There's relationships and intrigue, and there's even some romance, and so there's all kinds of things going on in this circumstance of the world just turning sideways almost all at once. And so it was a good story. It's very is exciting. Now I would like to discuss a more subtle book that was really pretty disturbing to me, very unsettling, and that is Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Ali. This is the only book I've read by this author, but I am going to look for future offerings that he writes, because this book is, something happens, but it's more about the relationship of a small group of people. So in this story, there is a family from New York City with a husband and wife and 2 teenagers, and they decide to do a little Long Island vacation in an Airbnb type rental house. It's sort of a compromise vacation where they can't really afford a big giant vacation with an airplane trip and stuff like that, but they want to get away with their kids. So they rent this really nice house. It's out in the woods and near a lake, and it's real pretty and very well appointed, and it's one of those things where everything's stocked, and there's a market in town to get the food, and so it seems very idyllic and relaxing and everything. But not too far into their trip, late at night comes a knock at the door, and there is this couple. And I will mention that the family that rented the house is a white family. A couple comes to the door, and it's an older black couple, a man and a woman, and they say, really sorry to barge in like this, but this is our property, and we need to come on in and stay here. And there's a scene. It's almost like a black comedy type scene that ensues, where the family that's renting is kind of like, well, who are you? What's going on? They're approaching the couple at the door as if there's some sort of scammers or invaders, and the couple is like, well, this is actually our house, and you're staying here, and we might let you also stay here, but we're coming in. and going back and forth, and there's a lot of, kind of benevolent racist attitudes kind of bubbling under the surface there, because they didn't perceive that they were renting from this is not who they pictured. And anyway, the couple tells them that something has gone wrong in the city. There's a wide blackout, and they don't really know what's happening, but communications are down, and they just can't function there, so they've come out to see if things are better out here. And they do find that the internet is down, but they're not down on all the electricity and everything yet. So after a whole lot of back and forth and misunderstandings, they finally they're all there together. But it's very tense, and it's very odd. And so we have this whole kind of strange dynamics going on between the couples. And then as things continue on, we find out that something is really, really wrong. And we never know exactly what happened, but as they sort of begin to slowly explore, make little forays into the nearby towns and have some encounters with other people, they realize that something bad has happened, and nobody knows what it is, how long it will last, and what they should do. And nothing is resolved in this book. Like, it starts there, and it goes for a while, and several ominous things occur. A couple of hints are sprinkled in about what has happened, and then the story stops. So it is like the most unsettling, unresolved thing, and I realized that I really want to read it again, and even more now that I'm talking about it. So I don't have a copy, but I need to locate it once again. For some reason, a lot of these were library books, but it really, really bugged me, and I want to go back and read it again and see if there's any more clues. But it was really, of all the ones on this list, this one was the one I think I spent the most time later thinking, what exactly just happened there? But I highly recommend Leave the World Behind. And the next one, I have a couple more I want to mention. I would be remiss in a video of this topic if I did not talk about a book that I have a mixed relationship with, which is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. So here's the thing about me and Cormac McCarthy. I'm not a huge fan. I have read this one and All the Pretty Horses. However, Stephen, my husband, loves Cormac McCarthy, so we have all of his books because it's one of his favorite authors. And when he read this one, he said, "Oh, you have to read it." And I said, "Oh," and look at it. It looks depressing. It's like, you're reading the reviews, or like, it's beautiful, but it's bleak and devastating. And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, "Oh, it's so good though, and it's not totally bleak. There's an element of hope." And I was like, really? So I read the book, and I get all the way to the end, and then I'm like, okay, I missed it. Where exactly was the element of hope? Because it slipped right by me. I didn't see it. So it is definitely, of all the books, this is the most depressing one on the list, the most dark, bleak, and you probably know that it's about a man and his son who are traveling. They're traveling towards an ocean shore, traveling across the country on foot. Some sort of terrible, possibly nuclear event happened right when the boy was about to be born. When the husband and wife lived in a house, the wife was pregnant. He is born in the immediate aftermath of that event. And later on, the mother leaves. She loses her grip and she walks out and leaves. She can't take it anymore. And it's about their survival together, traveling across the countryside, and all the things they see, people they encounter, terrible things, and sometimes a few little bright spots. But really, it was not an uplifting or hopeful novel, but it's just so beautifully written. So it is not for when you are in a bad headspace. Maybe not right now with the way things are going in the United States, but it is a book that I have to recommend because it did make an impact on me when I read it, and it's very much representative of this genre. And then finally, I do want to mention the one that I plan to read next that happens to be in this category that I've heard recommended many times is Parable of the Sower, or Sower, like reap what you sow, by Octavia E. Butler. And this is about it was written in the 90s, but it takes place in the early 2020s, so it was supposed to be futuristic. But it's about a girl who has hyper-empathy, which means she can highly experience other people's emotions. And she lives in a guarded community with her family in California. And so I think it might be a little bit dystopian. I don't know for sure if I'm correctly categorizing it before I have read it, but this is in the general area of the books I've been talking about. This is the next one that I wish to read. I'm also very excited to know that the author of Severance has a book coming out this fall, and the title is Bliss Montage. So Ling Ma has a book. I don't know if it's going to be speculative or some other, golly, I can't talk today, some other genre. But I'm looking forward to that coming out. And I checked on some of these other authors. Cormac McCarthy usually does not write speculative fiction. He does have 2 books coming out this fall that I know are going to end up in our home library because Stephen will want them. Rumaan Ali does not have anything on the schedule for release that I could find. Emily St. John Mandel just released Sea of Tranquility a few months ago, which is excellent. And, I left out a book. Song for a New Day by Sarah Pinsker. This one was, I don't even know how I came upon this. This was sort of an unusual book. And this book was probably the most cheerful of the batch because this one focused on what a loss it would be if we didn't have live music performances and concerts in a post-apocalyptic era. And in this book, there's a young woman who has lived most of her life in a very virtual type format. When she was very young, a series of events of terrorism and a pandemic have left where large public gatherings are no longer allowed, and people do almost everything virtually. So she has very early memories of being a very young child before this happened, but now her family lives on a farm. And she went through school virtually, friendships virtually, her early romances virtually, and she works for a company that basically you order everything you ever use and it drops it out on you with drones. So it's kind of like the future of like Amazon and Walmart if we never left the house again. But she gets a new job opportunity for a company that wants to, I think it might be a little side part of the one she works for, but basically they want to scout out bands who do sneak around and do illegal underground performances, and they want to contract them to make virtual concerts so that the concert experience comes into the legal arena and it can be monetized. And so she has to leave her little bubble of her farm and go into some cities and look for these illegal live performances. And what ends up happening is that she falls in love with the whole concert going kind of thing, and she's not sure she wants to participate in them being put into this contracted format. And also it's about a singer named Loose Cannon who was about to hit it big 15 years ago or so, right when all the crap went down. And she's a punk rocker, and she is a legend in these underground concerts. And to add also to the nuances here in this story is there's a number of queer characters, and Rosemary, the girl who's going out and doing the scouting, has never really had a real in-person romance, and all of a sudden there's all these possibilities. So and that's kind of a missing piece in these books that I have read, is any kind of queer representation. There's also not a lot of people of color in these books. So it's interesting to have a little more diversity in this particular book. And also it's just kind of a more fun book because it's not about like the drudgery or the horror of survival, but it's about an aspect of joy that has been taken out of life from the live experiences of music. So Song for a New Day by Sarah Pinsker is my real last book to comment on for this video. So please let me know other books that I should think about, or ones that you've liked, or if you disagree with my list. If you enjoy this, please like and subscribe. Sorry it got so long, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Bye-bye.